Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the stuff you're curious about and really try to make sense of it together. You're looking to get up to speed without getting totally swamped, and yeah, that's what we aim for.
And today we're focusing on some really, well, mind-bending ideas from Stephen D. Levitt's Think Like a Freak.
Hmm.
Our goal, basically, is to unpack these unconventional ways of tackling problems, making decisions. You should walk away with some surprising facts, maybe some examples that really stick.
Definitely. And for anyone maybe not familiar, Stephen Levitt, uh, he's kind of a big deal in economics, right? Co-creator of that whole Freakonomics phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely. He's got this real knack for seeing things differently, not afraid to poke at the stuff everyone else just accepts.
So yeah, let's jump right in. What does it actually mean to think like a freak?
Okay, let's get into it. The core idea here isn't about someone handing you weird answers. It's more about developing the skill, the mindset, to find different solutions yourself. Levitt and Dubner kick things off with a great example, the soccer penalty kick.
Ah, right. The usual thinking is, blast it into the corner, make it impossible for the goalie.
But the stats, interestingly, show kicking straight down the middle works more often.
And this is the cool part. They suggest it's the fear of looking stupid.
Right.
Missing wide feels different than the goalie just catching it easily down the middle.
Exactly. That fear pushes players to the corners, even though it's statistically maybe not the best shot.
So it's not really just about soccer, is it? It's about how often we let that fear, that perception, guide us, even when the data points somewhere else entirely.
That's a really key insight. It shows that tension, between what feels safe or what's expected and what might actually be better. Thinking like a freak sometimes means consciously going against that grain, even if it feels a bit socially awkward.
And it applies beyond just personal choices too, doesn't it? The book talks about how this kind of thinking can sometimes help align our own interests with what's good for everyone.
Yeah, questioning those norms, realizing the dynamics underneath are usually more complicated than they look.
It builds on their earlier work too, right? Those core ideas.
Spot on. Things like really understanding incentives, how they drive behavior, the absolute need to measure things properly, constantly questioning conventional wisdom, and crucially, telling the difference between correlation, things just happening together, and causation, one thing actually making another happen. These are like the tools in the freak thinking toolkit.
It sounds really powerful, but they do admit it's hard to actually do it.
Ooh.
We've all got biases.
Oh, definitely. Our own biases, what people around us think, it all influences us. It takes real conscious effort to break out of those patterns.
Which kind of leads perfectly into the next big idea.
Yeah.
What they call the 3 hardest words in the English language.
I don't know.
Yes. That chapter really hits home. They start with that story, the little girl at the beach. Remind us about that one.
Right. So this young girl, Mary, is at the beach. People ask her questions, stuff she just genuinely doesn't know. But instead of just saying, I don't know, she kind of bluffs, makes stuff up.
Right.
And it shows how, even really young, we feel this pressure not to admit ignorance.
It's so true, isn't it? That pressure to seem competent, to have the answer right away. And the book digs into the difference between facts and beliefs and how confirmation bias messes with us. We look for stuff that fits what we already think.
Yeah, which leads to this tricky thing about experts, especially when predicting complex stuff like politics or business. Levitt and Dubner point out their predictions are often, well, no better than just guessing. So many factors involved.
And the danger of pretending you do know. The consequences can be huge. They mention the Iraq War predictions as a really sobering example.
Yeah, that dogmatism, that overconfidence, it can have really severe costs.
And there's this weird societal thing where sometimes admitting you don't know is punished more harshly than just being flat out wrong later.
Exactly. People protect their reputations, make these confident predictions that might be baseless, and, that ultimately just erodes trust.
The chapter also touches on why big organizations sometimes struggle with this. Why they resist admitting they don't have all the answers.
Right. It can stifle experimenting, trying new things. If you're scared to say, we're not sure, how can you really innovate?
Feedback is so crucial for learning, but that fear gets in the way.
Definitely. Old routines, maybe not having the right expertise in-house, just that basic fear. It's a real barrier. But the main message is clear. Saying, I don't know, isn't weak. It's actually the first step towards finding things out, learning, making better choices.
Okay, so we need to question things, admit we don't know. Where does that take us when we actually face a problem?
It takes us to maybe the most crucial step, defining the problem correctly in the first place. Chapter 3's title says it all. What's your problem?
Hmm.
Hmm. And the big idea is we often just accept how problems are framed, by the media or just general chat, and that can send us down completely the wrong path.
Right, we focus on the bits that grab us or get the
Hmm.
most noise instead of the actual core issue,
Yeah.
like their example with education reform.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Everyone talks about teacher quality, and okay, that matters. But the data suggests stuff like family background, parental involvement, those things have a much bigger impact on how kids do.
So asking what's wrong with our schools might be missing the bigger picture.
Exactly. They suggest reframing it. Maybe ask, why do American kids score lower than kids in other countries? That subtle shift opens up way more possibilities, looking beyond just the schools themselves. They even bring up the idea of, like, lack of formal training for parents, a pretty unconventional take on education.
Totally. And then there's that amazing example of Takeru Kobayashi, the competitive eater. How did he redefine his problem?
Oh, that's brilliant. He didn't just think, how can I stuff more hot dogs in? He reframed it as an efficiency problem. How can I eat faster, more effectively? So he came up with completely new techniques, shattered all the old ideas about limits.
Yeah, he didn't just accept the record. He questioned the whole game.
Exactly. And the lesson there is huge, right? Redefine the problem, question those limits we assume are real. That's where innovation happens, in anything really, our own lives, big societal stuff.
Makes total sense. So, okay, we've defined the problem better. Where do we hunt for those freakish solutions?
Chapter 4 says you gotta look deeper. Like a bad dye Job, the truth is in the roots. The idea is that real original thinking means finding the root causes, the underlying stuff, not just slapping bandages on the symptoms we see right away.
Which sounds easy, but is usually harder, right? We
Yeah.
want to fix the immediate thing.
Absolutely. Think about huge problems like poverty or famine. We rush in with aid, which is needed, of course, but those are symptoms of deeper issues like unstable governments or broken economic systems, systemic failures.
They use some really striking examples of how digging down reveals these surprising, sometimes uncomfortable links, like the U.S. crime rate drop in the 90s. It wasn't just more police.
Right. The argument, backed by data, links it back to the legalization of abortion decades earlier. Fewer kids born into really difficult situations, which, down the line, meant less crime. It's controversial for sure, but it really shows the power of looking for those deeper, less obvious factors.
And they talk about history's long shadow, too, like how religion during the Reformation might still affect economies in Germany, or how colonial borders still cause conflict today.
Yeah, those roots go deep. And even in medicine, the ulcer example is classic. For years, everyone blamed stress and diet, focused treatments there, then boom, they find that Helicobacter pylori bacteria is the real root cause. Completely changed everything. Treatment became way more effective.
It's such a clear case of finding the real underlying issue.
Totally. They even touch on new stuff like research into our gut microbes and how maybe things like fecal transplants could address root causes of other health issues.
Wow. Okay, from crime waves to gut bugs, root cause thinking really applies everywhere. So after digging for roots, what's the next freak move?
Chapter 5 says, think like a child. It's about harnessing that natural curiosity kids have, that open-mindedness. Asking simple questions adults just gloss over.
I love that. Just dropping the adult assumptions and asking why,
Uh,
like a 5-year-old.
Precisely. And they talk about thinking small instead of always trying to think big, instead of trying to solve world hunger overnight. Maybe focus on smaller, manageable questions where you can actually make a difference, like Isaac Newton did, focusing intensely on specific puzzles.
And they have great examples of small thinking working, right? Like tackling drunk walking, not just driving,
Ah.
or preventing swimming pool accidents.
Yeah, and the eyeglasses for kids in China example is so powerful. Such a simple, relatively cheap fix, but with a massive impact on their learning and lives.
What really jumps out for you in that chapter?
I think it's that idea of asking the obvious questions, the ones we skip because we think we know. That lack of baggage can spark real innovation. And also the role of fun, making things enjoyable. Like those prize-linked savings accounts, saving money becomes a bit like a game.
Right. Using our natural inclination towards, well, fun or even gambling for good, like that spin for good idea. Working with human nature, not against it.
Exactly. And kids are often perceptive because they just see things differently. Without our filters, we could all benefit from tapping back into that a bit more as adults.
Okay, so question things, admit ignorance, redefine problems, find roots, think like a kid. Where do incentives fit in all this?
Ah, incentives. Chapter 6 dives into that. like giving candy to a baby. It starts with a really relatable story about how incentives work and how they can be gamed. Remember Amanda and the
Oh,
M&M?
yeah, the potty training. The mom tried everything, standard rewards, nothing clicked. Then the dad brings out M&Ms for every successful potty trip. Worked like magic for a
Ugh.
few days.
Right, until Amanda figured out she could just sit on the potty, demand candy, without actually delivering.
Huh. Classic kid move.
But it perfectly shows the core idea. People respond to incentives, but it also shows you really need to understand what actually motivates people because incentives aren't one size fits all and they can be exploited. They talk about financial ones, like maybe lower food prices contributing to weight gain, and some really disturbing ones, like that awful traffic accident incentive in China.
Ugh, that was chilling. Where the incentive was actually to ensure a fatality because the penalty was lower. Shows how badly incentives can go wrong.
Absolutely. And they also mention the resistance to using financial incentives in schools, even when studies show they can work, especially if the reward is decent.
So the size of the incentive matters too.
Definitely. A tiny reward might do nothing. A bigger one might shift behavior. But then they pivot smartly to non-financial incentives because what people say they care about isn't always what actually drives their actions.
Right. Cialdini's work. That energy conservation study was fascinating.
Yeah. Telling people their neighbors were using less energy worked better than pleading about the planet or offering small cash rewards. It's that herd mentality, keeping up with the Joneses.
And that bizarre petrified wood sign in the national parks, trying to appeal to goodness, actually made theft worse.
It's so counterintuitive, shows how complex motivation is. The chapter also looks at how just changing the frame of an interaction works as an incentive, like Zappos and their customer service focus.
Or clever fundraising like the Smile Train.
Exactly. But they're also honest about incentives that backfired badly, like early attempts to cut traffic in Mexico City or problems with pollution credit programs.
So it's tricky. What are the main takeaways for designing good incentives?
It's definitely nuanced. You have to really understand true motivations, not just surface ones. Find incentives that people value but maybe don't cost you much. Be ready to adjust if people react weirdly. Try to make it cooperative, not adversarial. Don't rely only on making people feel guilty or virtuous. And yeah, always expect someone will try to game the system.
Okay, this freak toolkit is getting pretty full. Now, King Solomon and David Lee Roth. What on earth connects them? That's a hook.
It is, isn't it? This chapter looks at how both, surprisingly, used strategic thinking, basically, simple game theory, to get to the truth when things were unclear. They seem worlds apart, but both used clever tricks to reveal hidden info. Game theory is just about thinking strategically when your outcome depends on what others do, like chess, but in real life.
Okay, start with Solomon, the famous story about the baby.
Right. Two women claim the same baby. Solomon says, okay, cut it in half. Drastic, right? But he wasn't serious. He wanted to see their reactions. The real mother, horrified, says, no, give him to her, just to save the baby. That revealed her true love, her identity. He created this intense incentive, the threat that made the guilty party, the liar, react differently.
Brilliant psychology.
Sure.
Okay, how does David Lee Roth, rock star extraordinaire, fit in?
Van Halen had this infamous contract writer. Absolutely no brown M&Ms backstage. Sounds like diva behavior, right? But it was actually a clever test. Their stage setup was massive and complex. Safety was critical. If they saw brown M&Ms, it was a red flag that the promoter hadn't read the whole contract carefully. It meant other crucial safety details might also have been missed.
That is genius. A simple visual check for attention to detail.
Yeah.
Like a safety canary.
Exactly. Both Solomon and Roth set up these little games where the reaction revealed the truth or the level of care.
So it's about designing a situation where people reveal themselves through their actions.
Pretty much. The chapter mentions older ideas like trial by ordeal, the thought being the innocent would somehow survive, and modern examples like Zappos offering new hires money to quit early. If you take it, maybe you aren't really committed to their culture anyway. It helps them find the right fit.
And the Nigerian scammer emails, the ones that are just ridiculously unbelievable. How's that game theory?
It's a filter. By making the emails so absurd, they instantly weed out anyone remotely skeptical. They only want to engage with the most gullible people, the ones who don't question the crazy story. It makes their scamming efforts more efficient, in a twisted way. Self-selection through absurdity.
Wow. It really boils down to understanding how different people react to incentives to reveal what's really going on. Fascinating how it applies everywhere.
It really is. And that deep grasp of human nature is vital for the next challenge, persuasion. How do you convince people who just do not want to be persuaded?
Oh, the eternal question. We've all been there. What freak insights applied to this headache?
Well, the chapter starts by admitting it's incredibly hard, especially with strong beliefs on complex topics like, say, global warming, even with tons of scientific agreement. They mention work like the Cultural Cognition Project, showing how our values and worldview often shape how we see facts, maybe even more than the facts themselves.
So just throwing data at someone usually doesn't work? Oh, makes sense. What strategies do they suggest?
Several key things. First, get that opinions often aren't purely logical. Ideology, who people hang out with, that stuff matters hugely. Understand that foundation. Second, shift the focus. It's not about your brilliant argument. It's about the person you're talking to. What's their perspective? How can you connect on their terms?
So empathy, basically. Trying to see it their way.
Exactly. Third, don't pretend your argument is perfect. Acknowledge flaws or downsides. It builds credibility, oddly enough. Makes you seem less like you're just selling something. Fourth, find common ground. Acknowledge valid points in their view. It opens the door to dialogue instead of just immediate defense. And fifth seems obvious, but crucial. Don't insult them. Name-calling, belittling, that just slams the door shut immediately.
That all sounds reasonable. But they also talk about the power of stories, right?
Oh, absolutely. Stories are huge in persuasion, way more impactful than just dry facts. Good stories wrap up data and context with emotion. They're memorable, relatable. Think about how parables or historical tales have shaped cultures for ages. It connects on a human level.
So it's less about being right and more about understanding the why behind someone's beliefs and connecting with them there emotionally and intellectual.
You got it. And sometimes, even after all that, the most effective, maybe the most freakish move is just to quit.
Quit! Whoa, hold on. Isn't that the opposite of everything we're taught? Never give up.
That's the standard line, yeah. They even bring up Churchill's famous quote. But they argue that while perseverance has its place, especially in a crisis, our culture makes us see quitting as total failure, even when it might be the smartest, most beneficial thing to do.
Okay, so why are we so scared to just walk away when something isn't working?
They point to a few things. That cultural shame, definitely. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy. I've already put so much time, money, effort into this, I can't stop now, even if it's clearly a dead end. And finally, we often miss the opportunity cost. What else could we be doing with that time and energy if we just let this go?
They really push reframing failure, don't they? Not as the end, but as learning. That feels important.
Hugely important. They talk about science, invention failure is part of the process. Failing well or failing smart is how you learn and eventually succeed. And sometimes quitting isn't defeat, it's a strategic choice, an empowering one.
And they even did those experiments, the Freakonomics experiments, where people flipped coins on big life decisions.
Yeah. And interestingly, the results suggested didn't prove, but suggested that people who followed the coin flip and quit a job or relationship actually ended up happier later on. They even share their own stories of quitting paths that weren't working, which led them to better careers.
So the big message is, quitting isn't always bad. Sometimes it's the rational, brave, and maybe even the best choice for a better life.
Exactly. Challenge that bias against quitting. See it as a valid strategic tool.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive into think like a freak. It's given us so much to chew on. Really thinking differently. We've covered, let's see, the need for unconventional thinking, the power of, redefining problems, digging for root causes, thinking like a kid.
Understanding incentives, using game theory to find truth, persuading resistant people, and yeah, even the surprising value of quitting.
The core thread seems to be challenging assumptions, right? Looking at problems with fresh eyes, not being afraid to question the status quo.
That's it exactly. A critical, curious, often unexpected perspective.
So a final thought for you listening. As you go about your day, think about it. Is there some established norm in your life that maybe needs a second look? Or a problem you're stuck on? Could you redefine it completely? Maybe applying just one of these freak ideas could unlock something unexpected, something better. What might you question today?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.